How and in what way did the Danes come to influence English? I was looking for some insight into the farewell greeting tar on the Urban Dictionary just now, and came across this mostly excellent top-ranked answer, adapted slightly, emphasis mine. A slang word for thanks, the word is a result of the heavy Danish influence on the English language. Most people do not realize that the English language's roots are really Danish, in Jutland. Equipped with this knowledge, this word is easy to decipher. The Danish word for thanks is tak. In Scotland and Upper England it was common to drop the at the end because of the way words were pronounced during the time of Old English and Middle English. Hence the slang word tar, which should actually be pronounced take, but over time became tar. After reading that, I also remembered reading, when I was in our chat, that Frisian was the closest surviving spoken language to English, and then remembered the Wikipedia article stating that many Danish speakers are able to understand some spoken Frisian. With those facts, I hypothesized to myself that perhaps the Danes influenced both languages, before they had diverged, some very long time ago. Alas, that's all I can venture, though I know a fair bit about more modern influences on English, that is, Latin and Old French. I haven't really seen this discussed before, which is no small wonder, as it seems that whatever influence the Danes had would have been ancient. It's also pretty strange, as compared to French, because Denmark is a bit away from England. It doesn't just have a narrow channel to cross, nor, if I remember correctly, doesn't share as intimately connected royal and noble lines as the French have with England. So I guess my question is, are the answer's bolded words above correct? If they are, can someone offer a nice précis of how we can see this influence of the Danes, and how it came about?
England before 1066 and after isn't one place. Especially so, northern England was very different historically and literally than the south. Until the Norman conquest, everywhere northeast of roughly London Chester was a Viking country, not an Anglo-Saxon one. This is still obvious in the place names. See for example this link.
It must be remembered that the Saxon king Alfred the Great, AD 849 to 899, presided over the southwestern part of England in his time, little beyond what were then known as West Seaks and South Seaks, and that for several hundred years the Danes had the rest. Here is a map, c. 10th century, of the Danelaw, the area of Danish settlement and dominant influence. In fact, the Norman conquest was only the second conquest of England in the 11th century. The first was begun by Sven Forkbeard, the Danish king, and was completed by his son Nut in 1016. King Nut, also styled the Great, ruled all of England for nearly 20 years. It is against this backdrop that we must consider the English language to have been profoundly influenced by the Nordic tongue.
The source you cite seems to confuse two different sources of Danish influence in the English language, the Jutes and the Danes. The Jutes are one of the peoples who invaded Britain from 449 onwards, along with the Angles, the Saxons and the Frisians. The Danes came as a second wave 4 centuries later, roughly from 850 to 878, and, as shown in Ad Robustus, answer, carved themselves the kingdom, named the Danelaw. The confusion comes from the fact that modern Denmark and Jutland are today the same place. However, it is not certain that the Jutes came from modern Jutland. Let me quote an excerpt of the book, Origin of the English Language, A Social and Linguistic History, page 53. So it was first thought that the Jutes came from what we now call Jutland, the Angles from the western side of the Jutish Peninsula and the east bank of the Elbe, the Saxons from the Elbe to perhaps the mouth of the Rhine. More recent archaeological evidence locates the Angles farther southeast and the Jutes on the coast, near the Frisian Islands, off the coast of Germany and the Netherlands. As a matter of fact, the real identity of the Jutes and their place of origin cannot be reliably established just from ancient texts, because they contradict each other. Venerable Bede, for instance, often cited as a source, lived more than 250 years after the Anglo-Saxon migrations. If you hypothesize that the Jutes migrated to Jutland after the 5th century, then the Wikipedia article stating that many Danish speakers are able to understand some spoken Frisian makes perfect sense. After all, people migration and splitting was quite common in these times. Consider for instance the migration of Goths, splitting and then traveling to Spain, Italy and Russia, or that of the Vandals, to Sicily, through Spain, Morocco and Tunisia. Furthermore, as you have rightly pointed out, the distance between the Frisian Islands and England is much shorter than the distance between modern Jutland and England. The most convincing observation is that the Jutes are said to have landed in Kent. That is quite possible if they came from Friesland, but less likely if they came from Jutland. The Danelaw does lie in front of Denmark, but Kent surely doesn't. I do not mean to underestimate the contribution of Old Norse to English, it is instead well established. One often cites for instance, many words in sk, sky, score, skirt, skill, scap, skill, scrap, or such important words, sket, die, call, egg, race, take. Nevertheless, one has to be careful when ascribing the etymology of an English word to Danes. It could be from Danish influence, or it could be of more ancient Anglo-Saxon origin. As for tar and thank, the origin of thank is believed to be Proto-Germanic, thankagen, and was already present in Anglo-Saxon English before the Danish invasions. However, the Old English, Ancient, and Old Norse, Eka, versions followed parallel evolution paths and met again when Danes landed in Britain. So yes, Tor looks like Old Norse indeed, but it caught up because it met an already well-established cognate.
A couple more points on the influence of Old Norse on English. The various forms of the third-person plural personal pronoun, they/them/there are believed to come from Old Norse air/aim/ira. I'm sure there are many other words, but this shows at what a fundamental level the language was influenced. Also, Danish/Norse influence helped to make English simpler. It was during that period of history that the language lost some of its more difficult grammatical features, in particular declensions, the complex system of word endings used to distinguish subject from object, who did what to whom. Old English used a horribly complicated system with over 300 endings, 5 cases times 3 genders times 2 numbers times 7 types of noun plus 6 types of adjective, equals 312. Plus there were additional rules for personal pronouns, and some irregular nouns that didn't follow the usual rules. It is thought that the influence of Old Norse helped to get rid of the Old English system of declensions. Modern English and Middle English instead use a much simpler system of word order and prepositions.